Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Hong, and I am the director of the Center for Racial Justice, and I am the faculty instructor and co-coordinator of a very interesting course called DOCUSTUDIES. And we wanted to begin with an acknowledgement, a critical acknowledgement of what racial capitalism erases from view. And Sitlali Lara, the student coordinator of DOCUSTUDIES, will offer us a land and labor acknowledgement. Sitlali?
Yes, so should I read it right now? Okay, yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Sitlali, one of the student coordinators. So I will be reading this land and labor acknowledgement. And these, some of these statements were prepared by members of the Awaswas speaking UP tribe and Dr. Melina Abdullah. So I will start. So as Aiko Day reminds us, racial capitalism mixes alien labor with indigenous land to expand white property as the basis and objective of settler colonialism. The land on which UC Santa Cruz is located is the unceded territory of the Waswas UP tribe. The Amamutsan tribal band, comprising descendants of the indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, and forced into labor, who were called slaves, but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas. We acknowledge the labor of undocumented and documented laborers who have historically and are still currently being exploited, at times to the point of wage theft, wage slavery, and death, and whose life stories have largely been erased from the landscapes and infrastructures they have made profitable for others. To our Indigenous, Black, and undocumented forebears and selves, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice for all that we can contest the multi-directional nature of racial capitalist violence. During this time of global pandemic, we invite you to acknowledge the land from which you are joining this class and the labor, paid and unpaid, that create the circumstances for us to meet. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sitlali. So that acknowledgement draws in part from statements that were prepared by the Awaswas speaking UP tribe, as well as Dr. Melina Abdullah. And I wanted to say that the Center for Racial Justice is now in our third year at UC Santa Cruz. And one thing that really distinguishes the CRJ, as well as the Department of Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, is that we have this amazing series of student-initiated, horizontally structured peer-to-peer courses. And these are DOCUSTUDIES, Philippine-X Historical Dialogue, as well as Black Radical University. And this event today is our inaugural first ever in the DOCUSTUDIES series. And these event series, which are tied to these courses, are the public dimension of these courses, and they prioritize and center community engagement. So just a little bit about today's event. It's going to go until 11:30, and I want to give you a sense of how things will unfold. First, there will be a screening of a short film called Halmoni. Then there will be a presentation by our guest of honor, Ju Hong, and this will be followed by Q&A and a very brief closing after that. So without further ado, I'd like to take a few moments to introduce Ju Hong. Ju Hong is a longtime Bay Area immigrant rights organizer who burst onto the national scene and on news broadcasts around the world when he challenged President Barack Obama on his mass deportation record during Obama's 2013 speech in San Francisco. A graduate of UC Berkeley and SF State, Ju-hong currently serves as the board chair of the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium, NAKASEC. And he's also a member of the Leadership Council of Immigrants Rising. His writings have appeared in many, many venues, including Politico, Huffington Post, and the Korea Times. He has a passion project, Immigrants podcast, which captures the stories of undocumented Asians in the United States. You can follow this on Instagram at hashtag immigrants. And so we will now have our film screening. So I'd like to yield the floor to Ju. And Ju-young, I can't imagine how hard it is for you to view that film time and again. And we really appreciate your willingness to screen that with us, to share that story with all of us, and to speak with us today.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, CRJ, for allowing me to speak this morning. I haven't watched this Halmoni film quite some time now, and every time I watch, always help me grounded. And the origin or the purpose of creating this Halmoni film was to really humanize the stories of the undocumented immigrant narrative and educate the public on the pains of family separation, as well as the dreams and aspirations of undocumented immigrant youth. And we use this Halmoni film as an organizing tool to galvanize the immigrant community and inspire people to take action on immigration. And so we hosted this documentary screening and travel throughout the country, including cities like San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, Washington, DC, and New York City. And we selected areas where a high concentration of Asian American Pacific Islander or AAPI undocumented populations, and where we also had a strong partnerships with local organizations and networks on the ground. And we engage with the community to support DACA and immigration reform and recruit outreach efforts to AAPI and undocumented communities. And as you may know, nationwide, there are about 11 million undocumented immigrants living in this country. Among them, there are about 1.7 million undocumented immigrants are coming from Asia. And in California, we have the largest undocumented population. And this data, it's several years old, but according to the Public Policy Institute of California, California is home to more than 2 million undocumented immigrant population. Among them, more than 400,000 Asian Americans are undocumented, making up about 13% of all undocumented in the state. And within Asian population, undocumented immigrants are mainly coming from the Philippines, India, Korea, China, and Vietnam. And in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level, local and state governments are struggling to manage public health and public safety issues with the large number of undocumented population in this country. And as a result of that, undocumented immigrants are facing a variety of challenges, including a lack of access to healthcare, higher education, and social services. So on June 15 in 2012, as we all know, President Obama unveiled the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or also known as DACA program, which provides temporary deferred action and work permits to an estimated about 1 million undocumented immigrants who have lived in the United States since childhood. Although the overwhelming majority of current and potential DACA beneficiaries are from Mexico. There are more than 100,000 people from Asian countries who are eligible for DACA. And while there are many AAPI DACA eligible communities, it was a very small percentage of AAPI have applied to the program. And based on our research and the community, believe that the low application rate is due to several factors. One is lack of information about DACA's benefits. Second, fears of exposing undocumented status. Third, high costs and fees, including transportation, visiting attorneys, all included in the higher costs. And the lack of linguistically appropriate DACA services to serve Asian American immigrant communities, just to name a few. And given that relatively few Asian American have applied for a DACA program, I have really highlighted this issue and advocated through organizing spaces and different capacities. And we have worked on outreach, community education, communications, legal services, and policy advocacy to increase awareness about DACA and AAPI and DACA population. And we have directed the efforts on the ground, outreach to high schools and community colleges, faith organizations, businesses, and other public sectors. And we have utilized, again, organizing tools like this documentary. And, you know, along the way, we have identified and developed AAPI, DACA community leaders to speak out and share their powerful stories and really connect with the community and as well as impacted individuals. And, you know, we also engage in policy advocacy with USCIS, members of Congress and other administration officers to really ensure the improvement of DACA program, but also there's a larger context of DACA is a temporary solution and we need a permanent solution for all 11.5 million undocumented immigrants who are living in this country. And believe it or not, this year we mark the 10th year anniversary of DACA. And we have made significant victories along the way, but obviously we have a still very long way to go. And it's been decades since Congress has not passed any meaningful legislation to pass a pathway to citizenship. And recently I've been working in a local government here in the Bay Area. But on July 7th, 2021, last year, I renewed my DACA, but my DACA did not arrive on time, and I got terminated from my job and lost my health insurance overnight, while I was also facing at risk of facing deportation and potentially separation from my family. And it was only after I called for help and mobilized and made close to 600 calls to Congress to demand that USCIS to expedite my case. And within 72 hours, my DACA got renewed. And through this experience, I realized that, again, you know, my DACA status can be revoked and lose everything and face deportation at any time. And it was another and big reminder that DACA is not enough, and we need a permanent solution for not just for myself, but all of our community members. And that is why I decided to get back to organizing instead of returning back to government, because we have a real chance to provide a permanent solution for everyone through the Build Back Better package this year. And if we do not pass this immigration reform, and then it is unlikely to see the immigration bill again anytime soon. An overwhelming majority, about 79% of Americans support providing a pathway to citizenship to undocumented immigrants. And so the politicians and elected officials need to show real political courage and fight for the immigrant communities, because too many families have been torn apart and separated because Congress has failed to act. And for myself and impacted individuals do not have time, and we don't have that luxury to wait next day, 2 days, weeks and months. Every single day is a sense of urgency. And I've been doing my best in my best capacity to mobilize and take action to hold elected officials accountable, and really urge leaders to keep the immigration bill to be included and secure a pathway to citizenship in the Build Better Act. And we have a short window to pass the bill this year. And I have to remain hopeful. And if immigration bill passed this year, we will have a lot of demands for legal services and outreach and communications. And we need to build that infrastructure in the immigrant movement and organizations across the country. And in the event that immigration bill doesn't pass this year, and then we have a midterm election coming up this year. And I believe that we have to shift our focus and energy to mobilize our communities and elect candidates who are pro-immigrants or who can be the champion of immigrants' issues. And we have to continue to not only build infrastructure within the immigrants movement, but also really pay more focus and energy in local and state government to help the immigrant communities at large. And I will pause here, and I think I shared quite a bit of the intention of the film and my work around the API undocumented organizing and the work that is happening now around immigration issues. And so I'll just pause for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite people through the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window, to submit any questions or comments. We welcome any of those. And so I imagine that people will be typing things in, and I definitely want to yield space to the questions. There are so many people here I recognize who are students, and I definitely welcome hearing their questions for you. But Jiyoung, I was wondering if I could ask you a question, and this comes from work that I've done. I have long organized for Korea Peace, and in the Korea Peace movement, there's also acute consciousness around divided families. And there's even a term in Korean, isan kajok, around divided families. And I'm wondering if you've ever thought about the kind of resonance or similarity between divided families who are divided as a result of the division of Korea. And the division of Korea, in the very first instance, was executed by junior US military officers who, in the immediate wake of the US atomic bombing of Nagasaki used a National Geographic map and without consulting a single Korean, drew a line, which is a kind of border through the middle of Korea, separating 1 in 3 families and precipitating a national war of reunification that has never been resolved with a peace treaty. And among Korean Americans, there are families like yours, and there are also families that are separated from families in the north of Korea. And so I wonder if you've ever reflected on what the similarities are, if there's any sort of structural continuity between the one situation and the other. And I'm reminded too, back in 2013, which was the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Armistice Agreement, which brought hot fighting to a halt with regard to the Korean War, but did not resolve the war itself. Bay Area Korean Americans, Deanne Borche Lim, she did a film called Memory of Forgotten War, which is another short film which is aimed at organizing purposes, which showcased the division of Korean Americans from their relatives in North Korea. And Deanne Borche Lim is also a Korean American adoptee. And no doubt you have done work with Asian Americans, Cambodians, Koreans, etc., some of whom have been deported for relatively minor offenses because their adopted parents failed to file naturalization papers. And so I'm wondering if you could speak about any and all of this, any thoughts that you might have. And please, again, I'm inviting everyone to put questions or comments in the chat.
Yes, thanks for the great question. So I'll say this in the context of undocumented immigration issues and coming from a Korean undocumented immigrant. So we have more than 140,000 Korean undocumented immigrant community in the United States. And I believe that's 1 out of 7 Korean immigrants are undocumented in this country. And we have about 19,000 intercountry Korean adoptees. Citizenships are not verified. And so there's a huge number of undocumented immigrant population that are still in limbo status and facing a deportation. And that is why we need a pathway to citizenship for everyone. And in terms of divided family, I think that it's definitely resonated with me. And with this broader picture around this this government, where I very fortunately qualify for a DACA program, whereas within my own family and other community members with this arbitrary criteria and eligibility do not qualify for DACA. And within the structure of your own families and relatives, some may have qualified for DACA, some may not, and that also created tension and division within your own family tree. And in a large context, I think that also created a lot of tension around immigrant rights movement. And I think that creates a lot of burden and division, and finding strategic and prioritizing the work that we are hoping to accomplish. And so that has been really difficult in many ways. And that is why I think at least the work that I'm doing along with the organization that I'm working with, we want to be inclusive, and we are mindful of the impact of the flaw of immigration policies. And so we want to include really permanent solution for everyone. And so as you all have watched my personal documentary, the separation is real. And this is one of many stories, and one of unique stories of undocumented immigrants that are going through. And until this day, still have this guilt and pressure, if you will, where I get to go back to South Korea and reunite with my relatives, but not my mom, based on what this immigration system that really hurt individual and just family and just the movement at large. And so I've been really trying to be grounded and use this channel of mixed emotions and pains into activism to bring awareness and really try to challenge our status quo of what is happening in a broader level, not just only in America, but in a global scale.
Ju, thank you so much. So I will facilitate the questions that were placed in the Q&A. And so we have a number of questions from people who have been taking this course. And one of them is from Faiz. And Faiz is asking you the question about how difficult has it been for you to decide to be, and maybe maybe it was a decision, or maybe you were catapulted, you know, you're so compelled in the moment, but to stand at the forefront. And the question also details, like, as a member of the Asian community, we are more prone to hiding our problems. Oftentimes we prefer to solve our problems on our own. So the question is posed again: how difficult has it been for you to stand in front and to represent a community that often prefers to stay outside and is politicized and ideologically cast as the model minority?
Yeah, thanks for the great questions. I think for me, it was definitely difficult, especially in the beginning as I'm coming out and sharing my story in front of the public. And I think what gave me motivation and the decision to come forward was largely because of frustrations and pains that I've been dealing with. My family oftentimes, ask me to keep down and stay quiet and try to address this issue internally, but it has never worked that way. And I realized there's a lot of obstacles and challenges as an undocumented immigrant pursuing higher education to get a job, and things that I really wanted to do. And worst of all, when I realized that there's a risk of facing deportation, there's a lot of stress and a lot of burden just coming at a very young age. And I didn't know how to take care of myself and really address this type of mixed emotions that I'm dealing with. But fortunately at the time, I found nonprofit organizations where they help immigrant communities and undocumented folks like myself. And through nonprofit organizations, I became politicized, and they taught me about just political activism and organizing, and helped me understand what is the DREAM Act, AB 540, and other policies and legislations. And I met thousands of undocumented immigrants through that that nonprofit organization. So it was for me, it was like a leadership pipeline to get way to enter into immigrant rights movement. And from that on, I met other Asian undocumented immigrants who publicly come out and share their stories. And I thought that was very inspiring. And I looked up to people like Tam Tran, Perna, and other who have carved out well before me to really help me push to become where I am today. And I really wanted to be like them and really wanted to not just adjust my own immigration status, but the community. And I knew the importance of power of sharing stories. And I also realized that there are millions of undocumented Asian folks are out there. And that gave me a sense of purpose and courage to speak out. And ironically, the more I shared my personal story and be vulnerable, the more support that I received. And interesting in that sense, I felt protected in a way that I have a lot of resources and support system. And that was also, in a way, a survival mechanism for me to really call out support by sharing my personal story. And so it was a little bit of, one is like sense of purpose and act of a lot of emotions to channel in that activism forefront. On the other hand, was definitely it was a survival mechanism where this is the way I can stay in put. And that was like my rationale in sharing my personal story. And from that on, I kept amplifying my voices in different channel. I think that this film is a art and culture expression way of connecting people in different ways. And I really, undocumented people have so many creativity and ways we can express ourselves in different ways, such as film, songwriting, writing on our bed, public speaking, and drawing. And I do think that this will help really amplify the voices of undocumented people, but also connect the public in so many different ways. So I think that's how the Harmony film creation came about. And I think now it's been a long time I've been sharing my story, and I have to say sometimes I really, when you share your story so much, you're kind of trauma, you're revisiting your trauma, and you're exposing it once again. And so now I am in a different mindset where I, unfortunately or fortunately, I shifted my mindset, the way I share my personal story, to really to be numbed into it in order to continue to do the work that I'm doing. Otherwise, it is very difficult to share your story and this difficult work that we are doing. I think at this point of my life, I think it is also for me to really help other undocumented youth to help train and share their stories. And that is one of my goals that I hope to do. That was a very long-winded answer. And I think I might have shifted gear a little bit.
But I think you shifted it in a way that almost anticipated the next cluster of questions. So we have a question from Amrit. Amrit is asking the question, and you began to touch upon this, and it's really about you know, how have you, if you've been able to do so, taken care of yourself through the serial hardships that you have experienced, family separation, the passing of your Halmoni, and, you know, what do you do to care for yourself, to show up for yourself? And, you know, policy advocacy is extraordinarily time consuming. It's so draining. There are so many structural forces that are arrayed against you. And so what keeps you going in this work? How do you deal with burnout? And how is it that we can support your work and you as an undocumented API person? So this is a series of questions that came from Amrit. And I'm reminded in a way of Harshawalia, who's with No One is Illegal in Canada, who wrote a book called Undoing Border Imperialism. And the question that Harshawalia poses is, how do we prefigure the realities that we are working toward? If it's comprehensive immigration reform, how do you, on the day-to-day present level, enact the kind of world that you want to see, including in terms of caring for yourself and other members of your community?
I think that's a great questions. My answers always has been evolve over time, but in general, for me, I've been actually really taking care of myself, or using this pains and frustration that I have, really putting into positive light into activism. That is why sometimes I go well beyond and do the work that I do. And that actually helped me to really cope the pains that I'm dealing with. And when you're in the activism space, you meet people who understand your struggles, and you're immediately connected with them. And I met thousands of undocumented immigrants since I've been organizing, and now I consider some of them my best friends, and we still have contact until this day. And I really enjoy spending time with them, and outside of immigrant rights organizing. And that's how I take care of myself, people that I want to be surrounded with, who are supportive, but also really understand where I'm coming from, some of the frustration that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. But on the other hand, that also counter, it actually burning me out tremendously. One hand, it really helping me just addressing one of the needs, but on the other hand, it actually, I'm constantly thinking about immigration. I'm constantly surrounded with immigrant communities. Therefore, I don't feel rested, or sometimes I feel burned out and I get frustrated, and I kept doing this cycle. And so I think that one, for me, it's important to be aware of that and mindful of that. And second, really address in a way that works for you. So for me, when I was in Washington, D.C. doing organizing, one of the undocumented immigrants activists once said, you know, we need to have a radical joy and radical rest. And, you know, I think we need to enjoy the work that we are doing, but the journey that we are partaking. And I want to be really trying to practice that, right? And, you know, I think I am one of many undocumented immigrants who are doing this work, and just the movement work. And there'll be a point in my life where I'll be coming in and coming out. And while I'm in this space, you know, I want to make sure I have a good balance to really do the work that I'm truly passionate about, helping the communities, while I also taking care of myself by really just doing the work that I really love, that nothing to do with immigration. For example, I like to just go out hiking or spending with my friends, go out dancing and traveling alone. That really helped me a lot. And so now I'm trying to really practice that and honor that, although it's very difficult. But I try my best to really honor those practices and really understand that this work is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's a movement work, not a short goal. Because when I'm so fixated in one particular outcome, if the outcome doesn't happen, I get disappointed so much. For example, in 2010, we were so close to pass the Federal Dream Act, and I put everything that I can, thought that the Dream Act will happen in 2010, and when it did not happen, I went in a really down, disappointed. But I really picked myself up and really try to enjoy the process and journey that I'm partaking, and along with really fierce, undocumented leaders that I've been working with for such a long time. And so that's how I try to do in this movement work that I'm part of.
You know, I so appreciate your bringing that up. I appreciate so much of what you're saying about this being movement work, which places you in a context of many who are all part of a collective struggle. And I liked what you were saying about how there might be moments that you step back and then you'll come back in, and that you also have to build in as part of your own obligation, not just to yourself, but to the movement, times when you decompress, you know, and that is also part of movement work, is that period of recuperation. And you know, I wanted to ask you a question and segue to a question that someone posed in the chat. You spoke about the DREAM Act, which was, you know, it was a bipartisan, in authorship. And it also included a provision that in the post 9/11 period, when the United States was waging this war on terror and wreaking havoc around the world, destroying communities, displacing people, the DREAM Act included a pathway to citizenship through the military. And so one of the questions that we have is, how do people in the migrant justice who are doing migrant justice movement work, how do they act in solidarity with other marginalized peoples, and in this case, targeted peoples, you know, so people who are targeted by US war violence, you know, could you speak about, you know, you're saying that there's so much that is exhausting around being around fellow immigrants who are working on migrant justice, and it can be all consuming and exhausting. And I'm in a way sort of taxing you even further to ask you, how do you act in solidarity with other justice struggles?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you look into immigrant rights movement, it's not just immigrant rights work. I think there's a lot of intersectionality within the movement, meaning that, you know, immigrant rights work is immigrant rights, labor rights, and workers' rights. And within the undocumented immigrant communities, you know, there's LGBTQ communities, and Asian undocumented communities, and undocumented Black communities. And so there's a lot of intersectionalities taking in place. And in order to win power in this political landscape that we are in, we cannot be in silo. We have to work with and alongside with other community members. They are fighting for healthcare, because healthcare is interconnected with immigrant communities. Climate change, there's a forced migration due to climate change, and we have to work alongside and find a common ground to build really this political leverage that we need to have to hold elected officials accountable and pass not only immigration reform, but also healthcare and climate change and other really critical issues that are impacting low-income, undocumented, and POC communities across the country. And that is why we, I've been really trying to working very closely and have partnership with, other communities, and within the immigrant communities, I try to really highlight, what is happening within Asian undocumented communities and just brings that forward. And I think we are in that direction, and it's been a long time speaking for just Korean community. I think we have a lot of resources and a network through a religious community, especially Christianity. And oftentimes I think they have socially conservative in many aspects, including immigration. But over time, I think we have still a long way to go by sharing personal story in front of the church. I think people, their mind and heart have changed. And I think a lot of religious communities and faith communities are now coming on board, and just generally speaking, coming on board and just really doing the work around immigration. And so I think every aspect of this component of that we are fighting for, including this militarization, I think that and a bigger picture is that yes, we need like intersectionality and working in hand in order to really have clean DREAM Act and clean comprehensive immigration reform that actually benefiting and exactly what we want from the community.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's true. I mean, the Korean immigrant church within a neoliberal landscape has provided critical social services that are not necessarily furnished by the state, but does remain a socially conservative institution, which also brings to light the fact that the United States, as a gatekeeping state, has policed and surveilled the politics of who it admits into its borders. And we can see this very vividly with regard to, for example, say, Miami Cubans. This is also true of some war refugee communities. And it's true of Koreans as a demographic in the United States too. All of these communities would have been policed explicitly they would have been admitted on the condition that they are anti-communist, and so there has been a lot of gatekeeping in this way. So one of the questions that was posed are whether or not the division of Korea has impacted the politics of the Korean diasporic community in the United States, immigrants, adoptees, and could you speak to that? Could you speak to how those politics have impacted your work?
Sorry, I was actually looking, clicked on the Q&A and I got a little bit, would you mind repeating your question one more time?
Yeah, so my question is basically, drawing from the Q&A, the degree to which the Cold War division of Korea, which is effectively placing a border within the Korean peninsula, whether those Cold War politics have impacted your own organizing within the undocumented Korean community, be that among adoptees or be that among other undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, I will say this just based on my personal story. I think that based on what I've been, working with and hearing from a lot of Korean undocumented individuals who are similar age as me, often came to the United States from South Korea around 2001, in part largely because of the financial disparity and struggles, and due to the IMF, and a lot of people have to really forced to seek better educational and financial opportunities, and oftentimes move to the United States. And that has been a lot of struggles on many front of Korean undocumented people, and that what I've been here, including my own story. My family started the restaurant business in South Korea. We want to just really have a decent life, but with the forced financial struggles within South Korea, and this aspect of this globalization really forced a lot of people around the time. And I think that has been relevant theme, and that's what kind of brought a lot of Korean undocumented folks to the United States. And a lot of people also really dealing with this concept of what is happening right now within the immigrants movement, and this around this immigration reform, around the context of this Korean and Asian communities. And I think there's a lot of communities are really looking into other type of legislation or visas. And so there's, I think, division within Asian communities, because I think sometimes they are looking towards other visas to really, or pushing for really ways to get their legalizations, rather than really solving in the more like broader issues. So those are the things that I'm seeing within the Korean and Asian undocumented communities, and the level of this the legislation that we are hoping to pass this year.
So Noel was asking a question, whether or not you could elaborate more about, Biden's, Build Back Better, and what types of provisions are in that specific to immigration reform. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so right now we have a real chance to pass Pathway to Citizenship, and we have pushing for registry, which is essentially allowing secure the pathway to citizenship. But there's also talks around including a parole instead of a registry, and parole is essentially a temporary status. You can think of it as DACA or TPS. There are some benefits around getting parole, but a very small scope of undocumented population may be eligible for a pathway to citizenship. A vast majority of them will not qualify for citizenship. And so I personally do not. Advocating for or supporting parole, but even parole included in the bill. A parliamentarian who is a advisory to review the bill and rejected the language in parole. And so even parole that has been rejected by parliamentarian, and we have organizations really pushed for different languages to work with to get support from Senate parliamentarian, but she has rejected 3 times, and it has been stalled in so many fronts. However, we still have different ways we can include a registry and pathway to citizenship for as many undocumented immigrants in this country. And one alternative way we can address this issue is really urging Vice President Harris to really discard the parliamentarian, because essentially parliamentarian is the sole advisor, not the decision maker. And Vice President Harris has a full legal and constitutional authority to bypass a parliamentarian and include language that we want and have pathway to citizenship. But right now, it has been frustrating and a lot of stalled of pushing this strategy. And but a lot of organizations are really taking direct actions and pressuring Vice President and our main leadership to really take political courage to include the bill. And I still think that we still have a real chance, and we can really see something meaningful, and it has to happen this year. And that is something that community members can help support. We're doing phone dogging, which is we are contacting our Congress members and people who are policymakers and decision makers, contacting them on a weekly basis, and we're doing virtual events. And those are the things that community members can support and really be in solidarity to help the undocumented community at this moment.
Thank you. There's a question in the class about how to support. And the question is, after watching Halmoni and participating in this class, I've realized that I have so much privilege as someone who was born into citizenship. I don't know much about undocumentation or documentation in general, but now I know how harmful it is to see people as just undocumented. And she says the film definitely succeeded in humanizing the undocumented immigrant experience, and thanks you for sharing the story. The question is, how can or should someone like the person posing the question support you and others like you? And you spoke about some sort of measures that we could take. Community members can help support by taking part in advocating with their elected officials. Are there other ways?
I feel like there's so many different ways allies can support. I think when I was in college, I think allies can help so many different ways. One being is, if in UC system or a particular campus, if I have a law school, then law school students or professors and administrators come together and provide pro bono services to undocumented individuals to get full consultations and partnering with nonprofit organization outside, along with the university, to provide legal services at zero cost. I think that helps a lot because within the campus, there's a lot of trust, and if they have already existing relationship with professors, I think undocumented individuals more likely to attend and seek full consultation than going into nonprofit organization that they may not aware of. So that one aspect of it, and I think a UC system or school or campus in general have come so far. Now I think most school have Dream Resource Center. We fought for a very long time, but I think there's still a lot of improvements and resources need to be done. And I think students and allies can really be in the system and advocate it within, meaning advocating for undocumented folks within the administration, provide resources, getting more funding and scholarship opportunities for especially people do not have DACA, and ways you can do activism on campus. And outside of the campus, obviously, organizations that really work around immigration issues. And, there's so many different ways you can plug in, signing petition to help organizing events, attending the events, and spreading the awareness, and doing one-on-one outreach, and really having this type of event formally and informally through this event in this larger setting, or having with the family gathering, or even church setting. I think all that really helps. And for me right now, I'm really trying to focus on this immigration bill that is taking place now. And you can really help support signing petition and joining phone dogging in various ways. And I'm more than happy to share more information maybe to you, Christine, and then maybe I can disperse to the participants here. And yeah, I think just be in solidarity and listen. And I think oftentimes there are time and place where sometimes they're needed definitely support, but also sometimes they want to kind of overtaking the space, because I believe that undocumented immigrants and youth should take the lead and space that we fought for a very long time. And so I think listen. I think the very first thing is to listen to the undocumented folks, what they need, and stand alongside with them. I think that's a really important part.
Yeah, thank you. Anything that you share with me, we will post on our website along with this recording. We will also be sure to distribute anything that you share with the guests who are here today. There are a number of really excellent questions, and also, Jiyoung, if there's anything, like if you have your Instagram, like anything you want us to circulate that we could do to support you, your podcast, anything like that, please do let us know. And we stand ready and in solidarity with you and others. And the questions, maybe you could just choose one of them, and I'll go ahead and just read some of them. One is the question, and you certainly are not compelled to answer this, but it's a question of whether your sister's situation has changed. Another question is, you spoke about immigration policy work as a stepping stone to a more permanent solution. What is that more permanent solution? And there are a few other questions. There are a lot of questions or comments just supporting you and saying thank you and admiring what you do. And then another sort of question about whether or not there have been any kind of family tensions that have arisen because of the work that you do. But maybe if you could just choose one and offer a short closing remark, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Right now, I think there's so many great questions that I wish there's 2-3 hours conversation. First of all, thank you. Thanks for having me here. I think that it has been really great conversation. I would never thought that I would do this type of work again, at least this time around. I think when we talked about just coming in, coming out, just burned out and just refreshing it. And I think for the past several years, I was decompressing and doing the immigrant work in different capacities. But now I feel like I came back through organizing space again, rather reluctantly, because of my DACA got expired, and I am yet again utilizing this frustration into activism and trying to really highlight the immigrant issues across the country. And all these questions are such a great questions that really help me think and really help me ground it again. And I'm, sometimes this type of format, I could be really tight and cannot really, perhaps did not share all the authentic voice in a long conversation. And so, I would also offer, my availabilities of this event in different ways, so that if folks have questions about myself or just immigration issues, I'm more than happy to do so. And with that, I think I want to say we have come very far. I don't want to be very cynical about this work. I think that we've come so far. We passed, California Dream Act, and we got DACA. There's a lot of different legislation and ordinance throughout the country that really protected and helped a lot of undocumented immigrant communities, but we still have a long way to go. And I think this is the really critical moment to push for immigration reform. And I want to continue to really utilize my own skills and knowledge and experiences to contribute my part and do what I can to help the communities. And I am right now doing more of an organizing side at a national level, and personally, I'm doing the passion project called Immigrants, and which is essentially trying to capture the stories of Asian undocumented immigrants across the country. And thankfully, I was so privileged to meet so many diverse communities through organizing, and I always wish to capture their stories and just authentic conversation. And that's what I'm doing in my spare time. And the way you can support me, it'll be fulfilling, is just listening to my podcast. I think that would be so much bring joy, and then and I really want to continue to do work that I'm really passionate about. And I'm still undocumented. I still have DACA, and I think that whether I become a U.S. citizen or not, I think that my lifelong journey and fulfilling calling is to do immigration work in so many different ways. And so, and I think that is why I came to this event, and I felt so grounded again, and I can't wait to continue to work with you and partner with you along the way in this struggle.
Thank you so much. Jung, thank you so much for spending so much time with us this morning, and for sharing the wisdom, the knowledge born of your experience and your organizing. And thank you for participating in our political education process. We appreciate it greatly. Yes.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Definitely.